Hi guys, and welcome to the channel. Hillbilly Military Modeling here with our new project. This will be the Soviet light tank BT-7 by Zvezda in 1/35th scale. This will be the build part 1 video. So we're going to start this video off with building steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. And of course the first thing we're going to have to do is cut us some parts off. So here I'm cutting off these housings for our Christie style suspension. And they'll be mounted inside the tank sides, inside the hull. And we need our road wheel arms. Now this is an older kit, so we can expect to have to do some parts cleanup, mold seam lines and stuff like that. And we're going to start with our left side plate as it shows in the instructions, and I am cutting these screw gates off a little long. It just makes it easier for me to trim them real close to the part. That way I can get my sprue cutters up real close to the edge of the part, and it kind of minimizes our cleanup. Now road wheel arms here have a slight edge on them. That's a mold slight mismatch. I'm using the word slight quite a bit, aren't I? So anyway, we need to sand that down. Also, we're going to clean up these edges. These older kits tend to have a little slight burr edge where the mold was separated, so we're going to go ahead and sand that down. So the first parts we're going to assemble will be these road wheel arms into these Christie suspension housings. The arm has a positive stop and a locator hole. We'll glue it up there. And then these are attached to the inside of the hull. However, we got kind of a problem right here. It appears this pin I'm pointing at is a little bit too long. You can see right here, we're going to press it together and it's kind of pushing the side out away. Kind of bows it out. So I'll go ahead and take the sprue cutters here, and we're going to trim just a little bit of this pin off. And we'll test fit again, and problem solved. As it turns out, all 4 of the pins are too long, so they all have to be trimmed. So to aid in the glue up, I do clamp these in and let it set until the glue sets up. And it's kind of important that all of this is as straight as possible because if it's not, our road wheels are not going to sit flat on a flat surface. So next thing we're going to do is glue in these drive housings. Now this vehicle was designed to be able to run on improved surfaces without the tracks on. That would save wear and tear on the tracks, and then the crew would put the tracks on to run cross country. So once again, we have a positive stop so that this housing is located correctly. Put a little glue there, and then we're going to run a little bit of glue, Tamiya extra thin is what I'm using here, where the drive housing comes through for our drive sprocket. And as you can see here, I'm doing the other side as well. Now you want to make sure that this drive housing is parallel to the side. So there's going to be just a little space between that drive housing and the hull side. So there is a little bit of cleanup we need to do. And this will allow the lower portion of the hull to fit flush. One thing I did notice is that there is a slight edge on the lower hull, so I'm using my file here to kind of straighten that out. Need to square this edge. That way when we put the side on here, it sets all the way up into the notch and is vertical. So I found that the easiest thing to do here is to glue the front portion on first, because there is a slight, we need to kind of bend this and bow it in. But as you can see here, I did slightly glue my finger. So, but to me, extra thin kind of came through on me. Anyway, we'll let that set up a little bit, and then we move down to the side and finish off gluing the hull together. I decided to go ahead and skip forward in the instructions here and just assemble the entire hull, which means that to put the top hull plate on, we're going to have to set these louvers correctly. We're going to have them slightly open like that. And we may also be able to put these parts here, B34 and B35 on. That way the hull will be complete, and if we have any filling or sanding or anything that we need to do to prep the hull for the rest of the build, there won't be other parts in our way. As you can see here, I've got the louvers installed, and I did put the top portion of the hull on. On the right side we have a slight overhang, and it shouldn't be an overhang there because this is on the BT-7 this was a welded up front, and a very small overhang on the left side. That's all of it's easily taken care of though. We'll just sand that down flush. Then I come back in with this Mr. Primer Surfacer 1000 and kind of go over the seam right there, because there really shouldn't be a seam on the side. So Mr. Surfacer will help fill this, whatever the glue didn't fill, and we'll be able to sand and buff this down nice and smooth. Also on the back, we had a really bad gap, and it was tapered, so I'm just going to fill it up with this Tester's model putty and just kind of scrape off the excess. I've used way too much putty on here. After that dries though, we'll sand and buff that in. It'll look just fine. With the hull taken care of, we can concentrate now on the front suspension steering components. As you can see here, I've got the right side already built up, and so I'm going to show you how it kind of goes together. Well, not kind of how it goes together. I'm going to show you how it goes together. So we have this trailing arm right here for the front road wheel, which is a steerable road wheel. And then we have our idler bracket and slack adjuster. So these two components are actually, they kind of connected. There's a hole, little small hole right there. I'm going to use my drill bit to kind of line it up. That's where our tie rod end comes through the front suspension there. Now, I will tell you that these parts are not perfectly round. You'll have to sand and buff them down so that they fit, but very minimal work. It fits, it works. So anyway, we get our tie rod in, and then we have a drag link, and it will go right on top, just like so. So what's important here is that we've got a straight line from our rear drive housing to the two center road wheel arms to that front steering arm. So before we commit to any glue, we need to make sure that those are straight. See, I'm just kind of eyeballing it here using this ruler, you know, because if this is not right, we're going to have one of those flying road wheels that come up off the track and up off the ground, and we don't want that. Also here you can see that we had a gap that I had to fill between the idler bracket and the idler arm. So our next little issue is this, well, the exhaust hole in the louver is not big enough for the exhaust. So, all you need to do is take a little round file and just enlarge it a little bit, and it files down very easily, so we can mount our exhaust. And of course, this model's not without small issues. There's a bolt head here that's kind of in the way of putting our fender on, our little rear angled fender. So I'm trimming that off, and that allows us to go ahead and mate that angled fender right to the hull, right where it's supposed to be. So I did modify the horn as well. I drilled it out and I used my X-Acto knife, number 11 blade, and bailed it out at the end so that it actually looks like a horn. Now we're going to turn our attention to these rear hull parts, specifically these final drive guards and also our shackle attachment points. Next up is the road wheels. So we do have an issue with these road wheels. There are holes that are supposed to be in the tires on these road wheels that they're kind of flashed over. So either a mold issue or whatever from Zvezda. So I'm just going to drill these out. There are little indentations, as you can see here, or I hope you can see. So, it just takes a little bit of time to do this. It can be annoying, but we're just going to go ahead and fix this. As you can see here, our road wheel pairs do not have a locking mechanism, so there's no way to really line them up good. And I want to put them on in pairs, so I'm going to use a drill bit that fits the center hole, and we're just going to glue these up. So I grabbed the wrong one here, it doesn't fit. This one is for the front. So the front two road wheels have a different size pilot hole. So a little bit of Tamiya extra thin, and we're going to line these up and let them set up a little bit. And we're going to go ahead and set all of our road wheel pairs up just like this. Make sure that they're true and straight, and we won't have any problems during assembly. That'll keep all this together. So we must have done something right, because all of our road wheels are touching the mat. So that's a win-win. So next up is gluing this screen into this framework here. The instructions tells us to do it. Cut some pieces that are 16 millimeters by 20 millimeters, but 16 millimeters wide is what we need in 2 strips, and I left them long so that we can trim them off, as you can see here, with a pair of sharp scissors. And this wire mesh, well, it's not even wire mesh, it's a nylon mesh. It's really tough, so you really need to leave it long so that you can trim it precisely. If you follow the instructions and you end up a little bit short, you'll have a problem. But this works out pretty good. And I did use CA glue to glue these in. Only thing left to do is to trim out for the exhaust. And once that's done, we're going to check the fit. Now, I do have a piece of polystyrene strip here that replaced the part that came with the kit, which was broken. It was broken and bent up, and so I just made one. And it fits pretty good. It looks really good. So we're not going to glue this to the actual vehicle yet until after painting. That way we can get our louvers painted correctly and everything. So this is just a test fit. So what we're going to look at here is the part B39, and it's you can't tell it from looking at the part, but it's actually supposed to be a toolbox. So what I'm doing here is I'm deciding where the center of this is, because after doing some research on the internet, I found out that this was a single box with 2 lids on it. So I've marked it, and I'm going to use my machinist square so that I can get a straight line across it here. So I'm just going to take a panel line scriber and scribe us a line across it, and that'll divide it up into the two doors that cover this toolbox. And you can see there we have our division. Now we need to think about hinges for it. So here I've taken some real thin polystyrene sheet and cut it into strips. This is 1 millimeter wide. And these are the back straps for the hinge assemblies, and I've glued them into place. So there's 2 per door. And now we're going to start to wrap around the top of the box to simulate the lids. And a little bit of Tamiya extra thin. Place the strip. Trim it off, and we're just going to go around the top of it. And this is going to simulate the edges of the lids that go on our toolbox. And so I'm just going to use a little Tamiya extra thin here to make sure that everything is set in place. Now I'm going to come back with some Mr. Primer Surfacer 1000, just like we did on the hull of the vehicle. And this is real thin. Probably Mr. Surfacer 500 would work better, but this is what I've got, so this is what we're going to use. And we're just going to paint up around the edge of it here. I do put 2 coats of this on to make sure that we've got enough to fill it. And we do the corners too. So the ideal here is that when we sand it flush, that there's no seams to be seen here, that it looks like one piece of metal. So once it's dry, I will take it and we're going to flat sand it. I just put my sanding stick down on the mat and run the part across it and sand it off flush. We want to eliminate any seam between the polystyrene strips that we added and the part itself. So I come back in with my scriber and I just want to make sure that there is a line between the back strap of the hinges and the lid itself. That way, when we go to finish this vehicle and paint it up and use some panel liner on it, that hopefully these details will come out for us. Next, I'm going to take my hobby knife and I cut a little bevel angled strip here and trim off the corners. These back straps were tapered on both sides, and so I'm kind of trying to simulate that right here by cutting these and trimming this little excess off. This will give us a more refined look for our toolbox. The ones I saw on the internet, that's kind of how they were, so I don't know if those straps or hinges were added later, but we're going to want the back straps of our hinges to kind of simulate that. Now we're going to add the top portion of the hinge. And these are just, again, small pieces of polystyrene sheet, 1 millimeter wide. And we're just going to place them right above and center of the backstrap portion of the hinge. Trying to make sure that they're as straight as possible. Since we've already sanded this, we don't want to have to come back in and cut. So we're just going to make sure that it's in the middle. A little bit of Tamiya extra thin. And you gotta work kind of quick here because Tamiya extra thin tends to dry rather quickly. So if we want it to stick, we need to get it on there as fast as we can. Yeah, that's kind of what we're looking to do. So next up, we're going to put the actual hinge portion that's got the rod in it onto our hinges. And I'm using stretch sprue here, and we're just going to glue it right on the corner of our hinge. Being careful as we can. Now, I did cut these a little long. We'll trim them up later. The important part here is that we get the pieces on and get them straight. They should all be in a line with one another. So we just kind of sight down the box and see that whether or not if something's out of alignment or crooked, and make our adjustments. And one's still a little crooked. We'll fix that. Once that's done, we're going to set it aside and just let it set up really good. So while those are setting up, we're going to go ahead and work on our latches. Now, I'm not really sure what kind of latches was on these. I seen loops, and some of them I seen nothing. So I rounded off the top of a piece of strip here, a little bit of extra polystyrene strip, and glued those on. We're going to let those dry. So our stretch sprue is fixed good enough now. We can trim off our hinges. I'm just going to nip the ends of them, and it's going to be the same length as the polystyrene strips that we put on the top of the box. And that'll clean that up for us. And once we get that under paint, that's going to look pretty good. So the hinges are done. So now the type of latch that we're going to do here is going to be the wire bell type. So this is copper wire stripped out of automotive 18 gauge electrical wire. I'm just using one strand here, and I'm pressing it really hard against my mat and rolling it with my tweezers, and that'll straighten it out for us. Yeah, that's nice and straight. So once we've done that, we're going to take and wrap it around the curved part of our latch that we glued on. It is a little bit tedious. So these are small parts that we're dealing with here. So once we form our wire on it and get it just like we want it, we're going to trim that to length. And it's looking pretty good. So before we glue these bails on, we need to put a dividing line on our latch. So I'm using the scriber once again, and I'm just going to scribe that dividing line there between the portion of the latch that's attached to the lid versus the lower portion of the latch. And we're going to scribe that in and clean that up. So I'm using CA glue here, or super glue, for those of you that don't know what CA glue is. And the reason why we're using that is because our little bail that we're going to put on here is made out of copper, and it will not stick if we use to me extra thin. And that's kind of what we come up with. And it looks pretty good. I hope these details come out nicely when we paint it. And we'll see, won't we? Here I've attached our toolboxes to the rear of the vehicle. And I think it looks pretty good. I think that was time well spent. So this will have to be the end of part 1 of our build. Next video, we're going to do a couple of more improvements and build up our turret. And we still have our tracks to do as well. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of my subscribers. I really appreciate you guys, and any comments that you have, please leave them in the comments section. I love to hear from every one of you. And if you're not a subscriber, then go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss another video. So stay safe, and I will see you in the next video.